I want to start this podcast a little differently to normal, Kamal, because the case of Gisèle Pelicot, for women, for me, there's a reason why we've all taken it so personally. I don't think I have been this deeply affected by a story or by a legal trial probably ever. Maybe the Bulgars, but this means something for women, and the verdict today, which we're going to discuss, is it going to change things for women? Not just in France, not just in the UK, but around the world?
Camilla, this has been a story where Gisèle Pelicot has said it is time for shame to swap sides from the victim to the perpetrator. It's been a story about her and about her empowerment. So let's hear from Gisèle Pelicot first before we discuss the details of this appalling case and the huge discussions that it has sparked.
It's with a lot of emotion that I'm here to make a statement. This case was a very difficult test for me, and I'm thinking first and foremost of my three children, David, Caroline and Florian. I'm also thinking about my grandchildren, because they are the future, and for them I wanted to really put this struggle forward. Aurore and Céline as well. I'm thinking about all the other families affected by this case and the non-recognized victims. In these stories that are often in the shadows, you must know you share my struggle. I'd like to express my gratitude, my deepest gratitude to all the individuals who have supported me throughout this, with the witness statements and the testimonials. This really gave me strength to come back day after day for this long trial. I wanted, when I started on the 2nd of September, to ensure that society could actually see what was happening, and I never have regretted this decision. I have now faith in our capacity to collectively take hold of a future in which everybody, women and men, can live together in harmony, in respect and mutual understanding.
Well, before we get into this extraordinary woman's courage, resilient grace, and what her waiving her anonymity has done for women everywhere, let's first hear from the Telegraph's Paris correspondent Henry Samuel, who has been covering this case from the very beginning. Take us through the basics of how this extraordinarily difficult and appalling story has developed over recent weeks and months.
Well, just a reminder, yes, this is probably the worst rape trial in modern French history. So we're talking about 51 accused. Of course, the number one person being Dominique Pelicot, who was arrested a little bit by chance in 2020, caught in a supermarket trying to film up some women's skirts. And by chance, the police grabbed hold of his phone and saw some strange images, and from then raided his house and then found thousands of hours of films of his wife, Gisèle Pelicot, drugged and being abused by a variety of men. And so a long investigation took place, in the trial of 51 men started 4 months ago in Avignon in the south of France. As you know, Gisèle Pelicot has become a global feminist icon since the start of the trial by deciding to waive her anonymity and make this an open door trial. So it's been followed all around the world, and today we've had the verdicts. So it's the culmination of a very long and painful process, obviously, for the victim. So to talk you through, if you want me to, the verdicts. Dominique Pelicot was convicted to the maximum sentence of 20 years in prison for aggravated rape. As a reminder, he drugged his wife without her knowledge, using sleeping pills, and crushed them and put them in her food and drink. And then he met these other men online and recruited them to come and rape her in their own home when she was unconscious. So it's a terrible, terrible story. And today, he got the maximum sentence. He will not be even allowed to ask for any kind of conditional release till 2/3 into that 20-year term. And even after that, it's highly unlikely he'll be allowed out. There will be a review. The other men, their defense mainly has been that they thought this was all some kind of consensual sex game. That Dominique Pelicot had showed them pictures of his wife while she was conscious, and apparently they were allowed to come around and have some kind of swinging relationship. But when they got there, she was completely out for the count, as video evidence has shown. And so their argument was, well, we thought that maybe she was going to wake up, or she would wake up afterwards and see the pictures, and somehow this would make it okay. Well, that has not washed, obviously. That has not washed at all. And they've all been found guilty. Every single one of them been found guilty. Not all of rape or aggravated rape. Most of them. The sentences have not been as high as the prosecutors were asking for. The prosecutors are asking between 4 and 18 years for the other defendants. And in fact, they got between 3 and 15. And in fact, 6 of them will be allowed to walk free because they've already been in prison awaiting trial, and some of the sentences are suspended. So actually, there are some feminists out there who are angry. They feel that these, the sentences were not high enough. But it seems others are suggesting that the judges, there were 5 professional magistrates, did a good job in that they didn't bow to pressure to give them all 20 years, but they looked at the individual cases and came to these individual sentences. So it's a very historic day, really, for Gisèle Pelicot and her family. She's got 3 children. Let's not forget that the daughter, Caroline, there were pictures of her asleep with her mother's underwear on in the hard drive of Dominique Pelicot, and she's convinced she too was drugged and raped, but that has not been proved, and that's been a huge pain and cause of pain for her during this trial. And Giselle came out and thanked everyone for all the support that she has got in this trial. She's been coming every day, and people have been applauding her every time she's come to court. And she is really hoping that this is going to somehow change things. That for a start, women will come forward when they feel that they've been victims of what's called here chemical subjugation, where you've been drugged and abused, potentially without your knowledge. And also the idea that a sort of rape culture there'll be some huge soul searching around that, because let's not forget the 50 other men apart from her husband all came from a radius of 50 kilometers around the home of the Pelicots that was in Provence, and lots of them were supposedly ordinary people who were married, who had children. And what the hell were they doing going to this house? And once they got there, what the hell were they doing staying and abusing this woman and allowing themselves to be filmed doing so? So these questions were not necessarily answered in the trial, but it's still considered here as really a landmark trial in terms of rape and consent.
Henry, what next in terms of that conversation? Do you think the law will be changed? Many people have been highly critical, not just of some of the attitudes in France that you've mentioned, but also that the failure rate on convictions for rape or even trials even taking place have been highlighted by many of the people demonstrating outside the trial. 96% of rape allegations get nowhere near a court case. Do you think there is any chance of change, and what practically is going to happen next? Gisèle Pelicot has very much said, or her lawyer has at least said, that she just wants to, enjoys the wrong word, but she wants to not be the sort of poster person for this whole campaign. Will things change, do you think?
Well, I would firstly say that, given the current French law, all of these men were convicted. So their attempts to say she was in some way consensual have absolutely failed, and that's using French law. French law, the difference, the argument in France is French law does not include, rape law does not use the word consent. Nowhere can you find the word consent as you can in the UK and in many other countries. Rape is, there are words that it's when you are forced to perform sex via violence, constraint, and surprise, and the word consent has not been used. So I think it's quite a complex debate, but it's certainly that there is a move towards including the word consent in the law and changing that. And President Emmanuel Macron, who actually was against that idea initially, has now come round to it, as have a bunch of other politicians. Feminists in France are actually quite divided on the issue, but I would say certainly there is growing momentum for it to change. There are some European precedents that suggest that France could actually be condemned in European courts if it doesn't get its act together and add that word consent. Free, unrestrained consent to sex should be added to French law. So I think that is a debate that's going to get only more heated as time goes on. Problem in France at the moment is we don't really have a government, and so they're not going to be able to change any laws until they get that sorted.
And Henry, finally, we saw Gisèle Pelicot leave court to cries of "thank you, heroin." Is she going to be able to go off and lead a quiet life now, having had her entire life poured over for the last 4 years?
Well, it is. Having seen her up close, she is an extraordinary woman. Obviously, she lost her mum when she was 9 and was brought up by her father, who was in the military. And I think she's always said that gave her that sort of mental strength. But there's certainly, even her lawyers are worried how she's going to cope post-trial, because obviously her life has been revolving around coming in every day and getting all this wonderful support from people, at the same time having to be subjected to hours of video footage of her being raped unconscious in court, which must have been absolutely awful. She's managed to get through all of that, so that will obviously be a huge relief. But she's, I'm told, surrounded by a lot of friends and is getting a huge amount of support and wants a quiet life. She, some say, is going to do a book. I think we're going to see her daughter, Caroline, step up more. She has already written her own book that's called "And I Stopped Calling You Dad," that came out 2 years ago, in which she explained what she'd had gone through. And she has now become a figurehead for raising awareness about rape drugs and what they call in France chemical submission. And there's a big documentary coming out with her in the coming months. So we're going to see a lot more of that. It may be that Giselle just decides to try and have a quiet life. Others say that she might end up, sort of embracing some kind of cause.
Yeah.
It's a little early to say right now.
Henry Samuel, thank you very much indeed for all of the work you've done on this story, which you can read on the Telegraph website. Lovely to speak to you on the Daily Tea, albeit about something that has, frankly, not just rocked France and Britain, but the rest of the world. It's easy to forget, isn't it, the daughter in all this, who has made her own allegations against her father, the fallout for Gisèle Pelicot, coming to terms with the fact that the man she knew and loved and had 3 children with has betrayed her in the worst possible way. Her sons and their relationship now moving forward with a father that they don't want to be associated with in any way, a daughter believing that she too has been abused. And this is why this horrific case has struck such a chord with women. There is an element of it of, there for the grace of God go I. And that is not to suggest, as some feminists do, that all men are potential rapists. But there isn't a woman listening to this who doesn't know someone, a female friend or acquaintance, colleague, family member, that hasn't either been, at the very least, placed in a very awkward sexual situation, at the very worst, actually raped. And the thing about Gisèle Pelicot is that the attempts by her husband and all of these men that were complicit in basically using her as some kind of sexual plaything, the intention was to belittle, to humiliate. There is something so excruciating about what she was subjected to without her knowledge that makes just women everywhere just so uncomfortable. I mean, to be filmed without your consent, to be raped repeatedly over the course of so many years and not know. And the other thing is, it's not just the crime itself. It was what she was sort of like really questioning her own sanity while all this was going on. She had been drugged, so she was feeling really sleepy in the day and couldn't understand why. She was having huge lapses in her memory, so she was questioning whether she might have dementia. She was suffering from gynecological problems, including STIs, and couldn't figure out why. So it's the deceit, it's the betrayal, it's the attempt at humiliation. It's this idea that women are lesser beings than men that I think really resonates with women. And for her to make all this public for the sake of others, as she said there in her speech, for women everywhere, for her own children and grandchildren, I've just got such admiration for it, because all of this must have been so painful. She could have just hidden away. She could have thought to herself, I don't need the burden of all this. I'm having to process so much. I don't want to do it in the public gaze. And yet she decided that she would, to try and educate the world, frankly, A, that these behaviours still go on, but B, to try and instigate some kind of change, to try and instigate some conversations so that we can never have something like this happen to another wife, mother and grandmother.
The idea of shame swapping sides, I think, is the most powerful thing that she has said. And just listening to her words after the end of this case, that she wants people to move forward harmoniously together, men and women. This is men's problem. This is not a problem for women to solve. And just thinking back to, the 40 years that I've been an adult, the conversation would never have been like this when I was a young man, late teens, early 20s. You would never have had discussions about, or not deep discussions about, the treatment of women. That has changed, I think, here in the UK. You would hope with Gisèle Pelicot and many, many others, it is changing and has changed in France. It was Hannah Arendt writing about the aftermath of the Holocaust, who talked about the banality of evil, and that many of these men who were described as, open quotes, ordinary, close quotes, although many of them were connected actually with crime, and how ordinary really were they, that for them at least, they were on the dark web, they were on these what are called swinging sites, and they normalized it for themselves. Yeah. I don't think it's normal. Clear. It isn't normal, their behavior, but they are able to find enough men to normalize it. And the internet has helped them find enough men to be like that. And that's one of the biggest issues to come out of this, is that these conversations need to be had where men talk to men about their behavior. When it was first said to me, Camilla, all men are potential rapists, and I know you've said that's not the case, but when I first heard that and I was in my 20s, I would just sort of reject it out of hand because, well, I'm not a rapist, so therefore, whereas actually you have to think more carefully that potential is the word. Physical potential is there, and you need to think deeply about how that should affect your behavior. The thing that was said to me once by a female, very close female friend is, what's the worst thing that a woman can do to a man? And she said, laugh at him. What's the worst thing a man can do to a woman? And she said, kill her. And just that idea of how we have to think about our behaviors all the time, I think is really important. I hope, but as Henry said in his discussion with us, you look at the actual proportion of rape cases that get through the justice system and lead to conviction. Very low percentage in the UK, very low percentage in France, a low percentage in most countries. But I hope that at least the conversation should bring down the incidence and the normalization of sexual assault and rape, and certainly thinking about Generation Z and younger people, the conversation at least is there if you want to find it, and that should give us a little hope. Another quote that was linked to some of the reading I was doing into the court case was, it is time for society to look at this macho, patriarchal world and change the way it looks at rape. And I think this is one of those moments, because of the strength and the way she has empowered herself and so many women, of Gisèle Pelicot. I think it generally will lead to that change.
Yeah, what troubles me about it is that, I mean, your quote about, well, the worst that a man can do is rape and murder a woman. I mean, obviously women are capable of murdering men, but I don't think women would ever be capable of being complicit in something like this. Like, did none of those men question what on earth was going on? It clearly, all of the evidence in court makes it crystal clear that Gisèle Pelicot was not consenting, was unconscious. And I think that's why there's a connection, because most women have been in a situation where, I don't know, maybe they're being pushed a bit sexually by a partner and they're being pushed into doing stuff they don't want to do, or maybe they've just had a bit too much to drink and they can't quite remember what's happened. And so I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that many women will have experienced this kind of like abuse like this, rape like this on such a grand scale, but we've all experienced a little bit of it. And it cannot be acceptable that most women have experienced a little bit of this. You know, how is that fair? How is that right in 2024? And I don't want to be demonising all men. I am a mother of a son. I've got 2 older brothers. I work with you. I've loved my husband. I've got very many wonderful men in my life who have been allies and champions of me. So I don't want to go down this road, because actually, do you know what? Rhetoric around, oh, all men are capable of this. Theoretically and physically, possibly, but morally and mentally and otherwise, maybe not. You go down that road and then it just enables people like Andrew Tate to start, you know, actually being even more misogynistic and fueling the incel movement and all the rest of it. You know, the incel movement, just incidentally, is fueled by men. It's not fueled by women. Let's be clear about that. But it's just this idea that anyone even thought that this was okay really, really, really troubles me.
I think for the people who engage in such appalling behaviour, the idea of feeling they can get away with it, and I think the internet and social media have added to that, and then this idea of using chemicals to subjugate women, and therefore I can get away with it. The whole point of this case was men thinking they could act with impunity on the dark web, and then because the woman was drugged. So I think those two things together do go against my optimistic instincts that there's more of a conversation. So you would hope that what might be described as uncomfortable behavior might be less likely now. Does that really mean that crime is less likely now? And that's probably where there is far more work to do. And you've mentioned Andrew Tate and the appalling way that that has encouraged lots of particularly young men to somehow think things have gone too far and we need to go back. And
yeah, it's like
that really worries me.
We can never go too far when it comes to women's safety. Like, let's go as far as we possibly can, please.
It is a real worry that we know that men of all ages, actually, because that's what was clear in this case with Giselle Pelicot, men of all ages, they can live, the internet allows them to live in a world where they only hear people who think what they do is justifiable in some appalling, twisted logic that these men live by. And so it's not just the conversations we need to have. It's not just law enforcement. And how many times do we come back to this, Camilla? It's the platforms, it's technology giants, it's the way that how do we get people back out of those really disgusting spaces.
Also, don't forget that as well as low conviction rates and things, we have had sort of institutionalized denial of mass gang raping. Look at Rochdale. Look at some of these situations where it's like, oh, you know, we still had that narrative in the 21st century of they were asking for it. Sorry. So, you know, and we have cases like Sarah Everard. We have actual police officers who are not just misogynists, but rapists and killers.
And then sharing images on WhatsApp groups, thinking that this is sort of somehow a way of behaving.
And it's like, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I have a feeling, although we want Giselle Pelicot to be silent if she wants to be silent now, having said so much, I hope she can do that, but I have a feeling that this isn't the last conversation we're going to be having about that case.